Ukraine is continuing to absolutely smoke Russian oil and gas refineries, but Russia is pulling out literally all the stops to try to put a stop to these strikes. Just how desperate is the Russian government getting? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. And by the way, hit subscribe because, well, as you guys know, we are always trying to get to that sweet, sweet 500,000 subs. Okay, so Ukraine, of course, is confirming that they've launched a bunch more strikes against Russian oil refineries, Crimean fuel depots, even a Shahed base. This is part of the Ukrainian strategy of hitting Russia where it hurts. And given that 50% of the Russian economy is directly tied to the oil and gas industry, with, I imagine, about another third probably effectively dependent on it, right? If you add in things like government spending, which is funded entirely from oil and gas, well, you see how quickly you realize that this is truly the weak spot of the Russians. And again, their targets, including, again, a major oil refinery, 3 fuel depots in Crimea, a base used for storing, assembling, and launching Shahed drones in Donetsk. And this operation involved missile troops, artillery units, and the unmanned systems forces launching these drones. It's pretty clear that this is a problem for Russia that they are powerless to stop. And we could see that Russia is really getting desperate to do something about it, because in 15 different Russian regions, reservists are being recruited to guard oil facilities against drone attacks. Now, I want to be clear what this is. This is a type of mobilization reserve to guard strategic infrastructure. So these are announcements seeking reservists appearing on the pages of local officials. And remember, in Russia, there is a mandatory conscription. Now, most middle-class Russian kids can get out of mandatory military service with a quick doctor's note. But every year, hundreds of thousands go through their required, I think it's 6 months to a year of training. And then they get out and they are simply part of a Russian reserve force. Now, under Russian law, this reserve force cannot be mobilized outside of Russian sovereign territory. It exists solely for the defense of the Russian state. But one, it's still an important recruitment pipeline for volunteers to fight in Ukraine, because a lot of individuals complete their training and then they are given a pretty strong sales pitch by Russian recruiters to sign a voluntary contract to go fight in Ukraine. But most people, most reservists simply say, there's no way I'm signing anything. Discharge me now. I'm done here, right? But they are still technically reservists. And now Russia's saying, listen, we're so desperate for people that they're saying, listen, if you sign on, you can become a type of special reservist. We still promise we're not going to send you into Ukraine, but you can guard critical infrastructure from the rising numbers of drone attacks. This is happening in places like Bryansk, Leningrad, Nizhny Novgorod, Rostov, Tambov, Tula, and Yaroslavl, as well as the Republic of Bashkortostan. And this, again, follows a law allowing these reservists to protect facilities on Russian territory. And the postings stress that reservists will not be sent to fight in Ukraine, but will remain in their home regions to guard energy infrastructure and intercept drones, right? In Bryansk, they're also expected to, quote, counter enemy sabotage groups and maintain counterterrorism regimes, like probably searches and stuff like that. Bryansk authorities are offering monthly payments of up to $1,000, depending on rank, with one-time bonuses of nearly $3,000. And I think the takeaway that I find most interesting is, again, that this is a sign, as we've talked about, of kind of the desperation. Now, Russia doesn't really have a personnel problem, per se. But what it does have is a resource problem. But actually, this is, now that I think about it, a fascinating signal. Because if Russia was really recruiting more soldiers than it was losing in Ukraine, why would they need to activate reservists to do this duty? You would think that either Russian soldiers who had served, I don't know, X number of months in Ukraine, they'd say, hey, you've survived, we're going to rotate you back and you're going to guard oil and gas infrastructure. Or they simply say, hey, listen, if you're a recruit, but you're a little wealthier or a little well connected, we're going to funnel you to a unit that does this kind of guard duty, right? You would think that would be pretty easy. But instead, the fact that the Russians are now having to lean on this special class of reservist just to guard this infrastructure implies that their existing recruiting efforts are unable to bring in enough troops to both conduct these offensive efforts inside Ukraine and still guard this infrastructure. Now, the other part that I thought was interesting is, again, that effective air defense operations are actually really tough. And the primary tool to do so is oftentimes like Russian Pantsir systems or other kind of interceptor systems. But instead, the preferred technique is literally just to have a machine gun mounted on a truck. And this is a really terrible method because it's really hard to hit an aircraft from a ground-mounted machine gun. It's tough even when you have a specialty weapon like World War II style flak cannons, but it's really hard when you're talking about just a conventional machine gun. You're essentially shooting at air and you're crossing your fingers. So the fact that the Russians think that even with a very low percentage probability of a shoot down, that it's still worth it to deploy these guys. Because remember, a lot of these drones strike at night. So these people often can't even see the approaching drone, let alone target it with a machine gun and take it out. And so, again, you can see that these reservists will work 2-month shifts guarding facilities, followed by 2 months off. They advertise balanced meals, which, as we talked about in an earlier video, is actually a pretty big appeal given that the average Russian has cut back on their grocery spending tremendously. During training and weekend recreational activities. There's also free medical care and medication as additional benefits, right? So, but again, you could not pay me to agree to be mobilized in any kind of Russian reserve capacity because, as we've talked about, the Russian government isn't like the United States, where if the Russian government decides to change the terms of your contract unilaterally, there's nothing you can do. Like, there is no redress to the state. There is no suing the Kremlin. You can't. There is no independent judiciary. So there is no hope at that point. So once the government has you contracted, that's it. The only thing that keeps them sort of accountable is that the Russian government doesn't want to have to demoralize the average Russian. But that's not the only trick, right, that the Russians are rolling out to try to stop these drones. In fact, they are implementing a cooling off period of mobile SIM cards, right? Essentially, Moscow will disable SIM cards for 24 hours after they're detected as returning from abroad. The idea is to prevent drones from using Russian mobile networks. We've talked about the fact that a lot of these drones navigate by using cell networks, right? And triangulating off of cell towers to navigate even when GPS is jammed. So the Russians have simply said, listen, if we detect a SIM card that's coming in from abroad that pings off an overseas cell tower and then it pings off a Russian tower, we are just going to shut it off for 24 hours, disabling mobile internet and text messaging. Right. Oh, interesting. If subscribers return from international roaming or if their card has been inactive for more than 72 hours. That's actually a huge pain, right? Because, again, it's really not that uncommon for someone to be out of service for 72 hours or have your phone off, right? Not uncommon at all. That's a huge inconvenience. The same mechanism already applies to foreign SIM cards, but now it's happening in Russian SIM cards as well. They also report, though, that a text message with a link might be sent to users, allowing them to clip, solve a capture, restore access, something that, again, wouldn't be possible necessarily for a drone in flight. But as they point out, there's many orphan SIM cards in circulation, including those registered to real people who don't even know it. SIM cards are often returned to us in drones. A very, very, but is, again, a sign that Russia is increasingly making its people's lives like more and more annoying. And don't discount how annoying things are. Imagine if you had that every time your phone pinged off of a foreign SIM tower, right? If you live near the US border, for example, or near a Canadian border, that could happen all the time. And then every time it pinged off the tower, you were expected to either solve a complex capture or do some sort of link clicking, or God forbid you just turn off your phone for 72 hours or go on vacation where there isn't a cell network. And then you come back and your phone doesn't work for another 24 hours. This sort of stuff, right? It doesn't feel like that much, but I can promise you, it's just another thing, another way in which the war is putting a burden on the average Russian. Anyway, guys, become a member at Combat Vet News. Thanks to our Colonel tier members, GMAT Club, Henry Rusier, Paul, James Porsche, and Peter Fucci, as well as all of our Lieutenant tier members. You can also become a member on YouTube, and you'll get access to the corresponding tier of Combat Vet News as well. Thanks, guys. See ya.